Well, on the morning of August 10th, the ground beneath western Colombia's Choco department roared with a magnitude 7.4 earthquake, killing more than 300 people and leveling buildings across Cali, Pereira, and Quibdó, becoming the country's deadliest earthquake since 1999. Colombia's president declared a national state of disaster within hours, deploying soldiers to affected regions as officials reported 86 buildings collapsed and 7 airports forced to suspend operations across the country. Just 5 days later, on the opposite side of the planet, a magnitude 7.7 earthquake tore through Indonesia's Flores island, killing dozens more and triggering small tsunamis across 4 separate provinces. During that exact same stretch, seismic monitors in Spain's Granada province recorded an unusual swarm of tremors rattling southern Spain, while seismologists continued tracking aftershock activity from a devastating pair of earthquakes that had struck Venezuela earlier in the summer. 4 countries, thousands of miles apart, all shaking within the same general window. So the question millions of people started asking online almost immediately deserves a genuine evidence-based answer. Are these earthquakes actually connected, or is this simply an unusually visible coincidence? To answer that question properly, you first need to understand exactly how Earth's tectonic plates actually work, and why earthquakes happening on opposite sides of the planet cannot physically trigger each other the way a falling row of dominoes might. Earth's outer shell is broken into more than a dozen major tectonic plates, massive slabs of rock floating atop a slowly churning layer of partially molten rock deep beneath the surface. Each of these plates grinds, collides, or slides past its neighbors independently, building up stress along its own specific fault lines over years, decades, or centuries, completely disconnected from along a fault line on an entirely different plate thousands of miles away. Colombia sits along the boundary where the small Malpelo microplate subducts beneath the South American plate. Indonesia's Flores Island sits along the completely separate Flores back arc thrust, part of the vast Pacific Ring of Fire. These are simply not the same physical system, and there is no established mechanism by which stress releasing in one location could reach across an ocean and directly trigger rupture in the other. Here is what actually is true, and it matters enormously for understanding why this particular stretch of weeks has felt so genuinely alarming to so many people. 2026 has produced an unusually active string of major earthquakes, even by the standards of a planet that experiences earthquakes constantly. Earlier this year, the Philippines was struck by a magnitude 7.8 earthquake in June. That same month, Venezuela endured 2 powerful earthquakes in quick succession, measuring 7.2 and 7.5. Mexico recorded a magnitude 7.3 in July. Tonga was hit by a 7.5 magnitude quake back in March, the strongest recorded anywhere on the planet so far this year. Japan and Vanuatu each experienced significant seismic activity of their own throughout the same stretch. Travel and safety analysts tracking these events counted at least 7 major earthquakes, striking high tourism regions across the Pacific Ring of Fire in South America between February and August alone, a concentrated sequence unusual enough that it began meaningfully affecting traveler confidence in destinations like Colombia's coffee region in Cartagena. By the time Colombia and Indonesia were struck within days of each other in mid-August, the year had already produced a genuinely remarkable sequence of major earthquakes scattered across entirely unconnected fault systems around the globe. If a story like this genuinely makes you want to understand exactly why earthquakes sometimes seem to cluster together in the headlines even when they have no physical connection to each other, hit that subscribe button now, because the actual science behind earthquake timing reveals something that goes considerably deeper than simple coincidence or hidden global conspiracy. Seismologists have a specific, well-established answer for why years like this one can feel so unusually active without representing any genuine shift in how our planet actually behaves. Earth releases seismic energy constantly and purely by chance. That energy does not distribute itself in a perfectly smooth, evenly spaced pattern across every calendar year. Some stretches of time simply produce more major earthquakes than others through ordinary statistical variation, the same way flipping a coin repeatedly will occasionally produce a streak of 5 heads in a row, without any hidden force secretly favoring heads over tails. Scientists studying the global earthquake catalog have found no statistically meaningful evidence that a major earthquake occurring on one tectonic plate increases the likelihood of a major earthquake occurring on a completely separate, physically disconnected plate within the same general time frame. What has genuinely changed, according to researchers studying exactly this phenomenon, is not the underlying rate of earthquakes occurring around the world, but rather our collective ability to notice, document, and instantly share news of every single one of them. Modern seismic monitoring networks now detect and precisely locate earthquakes within minutes, anywhere on the planet, technology that simply did not exist with this level of speed and precision even 20 years ago. Combine that with social media and global news networks capable of pushing earthquake alerts to smartphones within moments of an event occurring, and a genuinely ordinary distribution of earthquakes across the calendar can suddenly feel like an unprecedented connected global pattern, purely because we're now capable of seeing every single piece of it in real time, rather than learning about distant earthquakes days or weeks later through delayed newspaper reports. A century ago, news of a major earthquake striking Colombia might have taken days to reach readers in Indonesia, and vice versa, making any sense of temporal clustering between distant events essentially invisible to the general public, even though the underlying seismic activity itself was occurring at broadly similar rates. That said, scientists studying this particular stretch of 2026 have been careful not to dismiss the human significance of what has unfolded, even while explaining the lack of direct physical connection between these specific events. Researchers analyzing the Global Earthquake Catalog noted that 98 earthquakes of magnitude 4.5 or greater were recorded worldwide in just the single week spanning August 7th through August 14th alone, with the Colombia earthquake standing out as the most destructive event within that specific stretch, alongside a magnitude 5.6 earthquake that struck Alaska and caused light damage during that same 7-day window. That is a genuinely active week by any measure, and the fact that it happened to include 2 catastrophic, high-casualty earthquakes within days of each other, striking countries on opposite sides of the globe, represents exactly the kind of statistical clustering that, while not physically connected, absolutely deserves the public attention and scientific scrutiny it has received. There's one genuine physical connection worth understanding here, though it operates on a completely different principle than most people assume when they ask whether earthquakes are connected. Within a single country or a specific connected fault system, earthquakes absolutely can trigger each other through a well-documented process called static stress transfer, where the rupture of one fault segment redistributes stress onto neighboring segments of that same connected fault, sometimes triggering a secondary earthquake days, weeks, or even years later. This is exactly the mechanism scientists point to when explaining aftershock sequences, or when discussing how one earthquake along a specific fault might eventually trigger a separate later earthquakes along an adjacent segment of that identical fault system. But this mechanism operates locally within a single connected geological system, not across entirely separate tectonic plates separated by entire oceans, which is precisely why Colombia's earthquake and Indonesia's earthquake, despite occurring within the same general week, cannot be explained through this same physical process. Colombia's own earthquake offers a genuinely useful illustration of exactly how localized these deeper physical mechanisms actually are. The August 10th quake originated at a depth of roughly 110 kilometers, an intermediate depth earthquake occurring inside the subducting Malpelo microplate itself, distinct from the far shallower 10-kilometer depth recorded for Indonesia's Flores earthquake 5 days later. That difference in depth alone reflects 2 entirely different geological environments, one plate slipping deep within a subduction zone in one hemisphere, an entirely separate shallow thrust fault rupturing near the surface in the other, further reinforcing that these 2 catastrophic events emerged from fundamentally different underlying physical processes, despite their close timing. Scientists studying Spain's recent seismic swarm in Granada offer a genuinely useful illustration of exactly this kind of localized activity, distinct from the larger, headline-grabbing earthquakes striking Colombia and Indonesia during the same general period. Spain's National Geographic Institute maintains continuous monitoring across the Iberian Peninsula precisely because this specific region experiences its own recurring pattern of seismic swarms, driven by entirely local geological forces, completely unrelated to whatever triggered the Colombia or Indonesia earthquakes, occurring at roughly the same time. Meanwhile, aftershocks continued reverberating through Venezuela following that country's own pair of powerful June earthquakes, a reminder that even within a single national fault system, seismic activity can continue rippling outward for weeks or months after the initial rupture, long after international headlines have moved on to the next major event elsewhere in the world. The clustering of these 4 countries experiencing earthquakes within a similar window genuinely reflects 4 separate independent geological stories playing out simultaneously, not one single interconnected global event. Researchers have been direct about the broader conclusion this evidence supports. The sheer volume and visibility of earthquakes making international headlines throughout 2026 may feel exceptional from a human and media perspective, but it does not by itself represent a sign that the planet is entering some kind of new, more seismically active era. Earth continues, releasing the energy accumulated by its tectonic plates exactly as it has done for millions of years, following the same fundamental physical processes that have shaped this planet since long before human beings existed to notice or document any of it. Seismologists tracking the global catalog note that the total number of significant earthquakes recorded in 2026 remains well within the normal range observed across the past decade, even though the specific timing and destructiveness of events like Colombia and Indonesia's earthquakes made this particular stretch feel exceptional to anyone following the news. The genuine difference in 2026 is simply how completely and instantly we are now capable of observing, measuring, and sharing news of these events as they happen, rather than any underlying change in the planet's actual seismic behavior. None of this diminishes the very real human tragedy unfolding across each of these individual countries. Colombia's earthquake killed more than 300 people and left hundreds more missing, destroying more than 14,000 homes and damaging over 81,000 more, prompting international rescue teams from the United States, Ecuador, El Salvador, and Israel to deploy to the disaster zone. Indonesia's earthquake claimed nearly 70 additional lives and displaced thousands of residents across Flores Island, with damage extending to homes, schools, and health facilities across an already vulnerable island community. These remain genuine, devastating catastrophes, deserving of the full attention and humanitarian response they have received, regardless of whether they share any underlying physical connection to each other. Understanding that these earthquakes are not physically linked does not make either disaster any less real or any less deserving of the world's continued support and attention as recovery efforts continue in both regions. If this story changed the way you think about earthquakes clustering together in the headlines, make sure you like this video and subscribe, because we cover the science separating genuine global patterns from statistical coincidence that most breaking news coverage never takes the time to properly explain. 4 countries experiencing major earthquakes within the same general stretch of weeks makes for a genuinely striking headline, but the scientists studying our planet's tectonic plates are clear that this represents an unusually active period of ordinary seismic activity, not evidence of some hidden interconnected force, operating beneath the surface of the entire globe, one fault line acting entirely on its own, thousands of miles from the next. Stay alert, stay informed, and I will see you in the next one.